There's no music or anything, right?
To start, I was in Pitești, which is 110 kilometers from Bucharest.
In December of 1989, I was in Pitești, which is 110 kilometers from Bucharest. I was in a military unit that was practically a school for officers. They had a small company of soldiers who took care of all the maintenance, and I was in the transmission department. Then they sent me to another place, and then they put me under arrest for a while because I did a lot of bad things according to their terms. For me, it was normal. For example, I didn't want to go on watch, so I went to sleep. I got 3 days of arrest on that one. I did it again. I got 9 days. Then I was without my shoes inside the military unit because I thought it's normal to wear slippers, and I don't know, I thought it was a little bit like the MASH 4077. So, half of my military term was under arrest, and the other half was training in nothing. I was the only one in the military unit who could transmit outside the unit during that period because I was in charge of that. So I called my parents around December 16th, and they told me something big was going on in Timisoara. We cannot tell you what, they told me, but it's a very big thing. Up to then, we were just a military unit during peacetime. But around December 16th, our unit was activated to intervene in Bucharest. In Bucharest, we were told, foreign agents were working against our beautiful, extraordinary, fabulous people. So, we were activated and assigned to the fighting machines. I was assigned to be in charge of the communication. I was a sergeant, nobody. There was this officer over me, but the problem was he was literally shaking in his pants. He'd never fired a bullet in his life, and he asked me to help him. And I said, "Do you know that I shit my pants? You really want me to go fight?" I remember me and him starting to cry the moment we tried to load the machine gun. It was like a 15 millimeter gun. I said, "What do we do? We can't shoot." We didn't know where we were going. We didn't know anything about the mission. So I went to buy something to eat. There was this kiosk there, and the guy at the kiosk was a civilian, so he came to the unit every day. And when I entered, he said, "Close the door. Come in." And he turned on the radio and said, "Listen, something is wrong here. Call your father now." So I called my father from the phone inside the kiosk, and my father said, "Everything they say is bullshit. Ceausescu will fall." And at that moment, the phone was cut. And I had to go out. I was absolutely astonished. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what to do. I didn't expect that. I knew what had happened in Timișoara, but I didn't expect anything in Bucharest. I mean, in Bucharest, they had heavy artillery. On December 21st, we got the orders to go to Bucharest. Already, Ceausescu had left by helicopter, and it was evening, and everybody said the terrorists were shooting. They sent us to Bucharest with our fighting machines. Imagine how stupid that was. On TV was the news, and one smart guy from our unit was watching the news, and he said, "Those are our machines!" They're transmitting the news on the TV that the terrorists are coming to Bucharest, but they were showing a picture of our unit. And then they were asking the army from Bucharest to use their tanks to go against these fighting machines that were us. So the guy looking at the TV went to the commander and said, "Cancel everything, because they're coming to kill us. We're going to kill them, but we're the same army. It's not another army. There are no terrorists. There's nothing but us." It was absolutely terrifying. And the commander said, "Stop everything. Tell them to stand down." He called the command in Bucharest and somehow turned around after going only 2 or 3 kilometers on the highway. Now, that night, we had to guard everything. It was very dark. We had been shooting at another army unit because they were shooting at us. And there was a third army unit shooting at both of us. Nobody knew exactly what was happening. I mean, you see bullets, you just shoot in that direction. And we had no clue how to shoot. I didn't fire the gun into the air. Never, never. I was afraid of somehow killing something. There is no word to define that feeling when you're 18 or 19 and someone gives you a gun and says, "This is war. Shoot anything that moves." I can't do that. I'm a half Buddhist. I mean, really, I catch a mosquito and I throw it out the window. So, how could I kill a human being?
The discussion started in January 90 about the rights of the minorities.
The discussion about the rights of the minorities started in Romania as early as January 1990. The Hungarian community already organized itself officially in a political union, the Democratic Union of Hungarians in Romania. They were saying, and I thought it was normal, that now that the Ceausescu regime was finished, they would like to have their rights back, which had been limited by the National Communist regime. I participated in quite heated debates about the status of different schools. At the end of these debates, a young reporter from the local TV asked me for an interview. I said what I thought about the rights of minorities, that we were not enemies, that we had to build up a new society together, and that we should be very careful not to let things go in a bad direction. I said that I hoped our city didn't go in the same direction as Nagorno-Karabakh. Already a serious conflict between Armenians and Azeris was going on there, so we have to avoid another Nagorno-Karabakh and Târgu Mureș, I said. The interview ended up in Bucharest, where it was shown on national TV on a day when everyone was watching. It was January 28th, when there was a huge demonstration in Bucharest. I was not informed that my interview had been sent to Bucharest. I was at home, watching TV with my husband and son, and suddenly the national TV1 broadcast of the big meeting from Bucharest was interrupted, and the presenter said, And now we will broadcast an interview with a lady from Târgu Mureș who is advocating in favor of good relations between Romanians and Hungarians. And I saw myself on TV. We had no telephone at the time. After 10 minutes, my neighbor came over and said that someone would like to speak with me. They'd already tracked down the telephone number of my neighbor. Then my father came over and said, "Come fast to our home. There are so many people calling you." A lot of people were calling me and congratulating me and saying, "Finally, it's wonderful to hear a democratic voice." But others were calling me and saying, "You bitch. You deserve to be killed. You should die. You're a traitor to the nation."
Wir fürchten nichts, ja nichts, den Donner der Kanonen. Wir fürchten nichts, ja nichts, die norske Polizei.
They agreed that there should be Gleichstellungsbeauftragter, I don't know. There should be a state secretary, a kind of state secretary for equal opportunities for women and men.
The new East German government, after the democratic elections of 1990, agreed that there should be a state secretary responsible for equal opportunities for women and men. They asked me if I would do that. I didn't know what a state secretary was, and I didn't know what equal opportunity meant. This was such a crazy time. I already had 4 children at this point, 2 boys and 2 girls. I was invited to come to the Volkskammer to introduce myself. I didn't know why I should go there, but I went there. They asked me, "Now, what are you going to do?" "What should I do?" I asked. "You'll be the state secretary for equal opportunity." But I don't know what that is. It doesn't matter, we don't either. Now, tell us your biography and some ideas about equal opportunity. I didn't know what to say. But in the end I said, okay, equal opportunity for women, well, that means that since probably women are discriminated against, they think that they need equal opportunity. So I talked for some time about that. Then it was time for questions, and a man stood up and asked me the first question. "We have heard you are the mother of 4 children. How do you think you can combine your private responsibilities as a mother with your responsibilities as state secretary?" And I thought, really, what am I doing here? This is completely stupid. But then another person stood up and said, "That's a very interesting question, because in this group there are many men who have 2, 3, 4 kids, and never has somebody asked them how they could combine their responsibilities." That's when I understood what this was all about. And I agreed to do it. So I became state secretary for equal opportunity.
Dziś szkoda łez, był NZS. Dziś szkoda łez, był NZS. Sondaże opinii z kamerą.
I was thrilled. And I went down to Central Station to talk with the strike committee.
There was a strike of Polish railroads in the fall of 1990. The strike was in defense of nurses' demands for higher wages. The reasoning was nurses can't go on strike because they can't abandon patients. That means they'll always get screwed. So they need someone else to strike on their behalf and on behalf of the common interest. The railroad workers went on strike, and to make sure that there was no confusion, their only demand was the implementation of the nurses' demands. I was thrilled. I went down to Central Station to talk to the strike committee. I pretended to be a disgruntled customer. "Nurses, sure, whatever," I said, "but I need to be in Kraków." And this railroad man, with a huge grin, patted me on the back and said, "There are more important things in life than being in Krakow on time."
Nie wird das Meer versiegen, mein Lieb, nie wird der Fels vergehen. Und ich, mein Lieb, ich bleibe dir, bis all dies ist.
What is there to describe?
I'm indeed uncomfortable talking about this. What is there to describe? I didn't find it out myself. Some of my friends knew it a year before me and didn't warn me. I read it in the newspaper. That's how I found out that my husband was a Stasi spy. A very old friend of mine, he was a publisher of a newly established newspaper, Die Andere, called me one evening and said, "Vera, tomorrow when Die Andere comes out, there will be a report that Knut was a spy. When will you resign as a parliamentarian?" And I told him, "What? Why should I resign when my husband was a spy?" This was my first reaction. Of course I was shocked. I found this question so unbelievable that it lessened my shock about Knut. The second thing I did was go to Knut and say, "Klaus Wolfram called me and told me you have been a Stasi spy. Is this true?" And he said no. I said, "Be that as it may, I will go to Berlin and I will find out immediately if it is true or not. So if it is true, please tell me." But he said no. The next day, I went to Berlin, and in the evening I knew he was a spy. And this was the end of our marriage. It was published shortly before Christmas in 1991 that he was a spy. This was my special Christmas present. As soon as I confronted him with the facts that I knew he was a spy, he said yes. 10 years later, he said that he cooperated with the Stasi because he feared very much that I could be arrested for my activities. And if he cooperated with the Stasi, he would be able to prevent my arrest. I believe him because he tried all he could to prevent me from going to this demonstration where I was indeed arrested.
V Sloveniji sem pa prišel, ko so starši so me prinesli, ko sem bil star 1 let.
We came from Bosnia to Slovenia when I was 1 year old, and 30 years later I was erased. This is how it happened. On December 31st, I had a major car crash. I had bit through my tongue, broken my pelvis, and was in a coma. During all of the following year, 1991, I was in hospital undergoing recuperation and rehabilitation. In that same year, the government was accepting applications for citizenship, so I went to apply. I'd already received my identity card without any problem, but the employee at the unit told me that I had already missed the term. Then in March of 1992, I got an invitation from the administrative unit saying that I must go there and arrange things. The clerk asked me if I had Slovenian citizenship. I said, no, but it's being arranged. Then she said, I must give her my ID card. She took it and punched a hole in it. I didn't know what that meant. Later, they told me my card wasn't valid anymore, that I was erased from the registry of permanent citizens, and I had to arrange my status as a foreigner. I didn't know what the consequences would be, not until I had further health issues, and I couldn't go to the doctor because they wouldn't treat me without an ID. I had arguments with my wife because I wasn't earning any money and I couldn't be an equal part of the community. Without documents, I couldn't go to the doctor. Without papers, I couldn't get a job. I went to the Red Cross. And they said, well, They couldn't help me because I wasn't a refugee. I wasn't anything. I wasn't entitled to any help. And that's when my problem started.
You go to buy, I don't know, a bread, and in the morning it is the price is 10 dinars, and in the noon it's 100 dinars, and in the evening it's 1,000 dinars.
In 1993, when I started to draw comics about what was going on around me, we went into a period of hyperinflation that was very much like what happened in Germany and Hungary after the First World War. You go to buy bread. In the morning, the price is 10 dinars. In the afternoon, it's 100 dinars. And in the evening, it was 1,000 dinars. It was a completely crazy situation just to buy regular things. For most people in the 1990s, if you said you were from Serbia, they thought you were scary. You were part of a reality that was presented like it was Nazi Germany, which really was not the case. Ours was very much a society that turned the wrong way in many ways, that made many bad decisions politically and also strategically. But if I had to judge it now, Serbia was a confused country with confused people who were not able to realize what was going on around them. Sometimes when you're confused, you act violently. Most of the atrocities that were done on the Serbian side were not done under strict instructions like the case with Nazi Germany, where they had a plan for the different society that they wanted to build. Here the people were bewildered by everything that was going on. Maybe this is going to sound awful, but in some sense, these were crimes of passion. Most of the Serbian people liked Yugoslavia. They didn't want it to split apart. Sometimes, if someone close to you betrays you, you have violent feelings. You want to kick them or kill them. A huge part of the crimes was done in this strange state of betrayal, like a lover who's been betrayed.
My parents were under the siege for 2 years, which is actually never, it is the untold stories. You kind of said internationally, you know about Dubrovnik, you know about the Vukovar, but you don't know about the cities like Zadar.
In Zadar, my parents, they were under siege for 2 years. Cities like Zadar were bombed daily. The Serbs were masters of psychological warfare. Zadar was a city without electricity, on a constant general alert. Then, as the sun went down, they would drop a bomb or two. It was a good night type of thing. For my parents, this was the second war they experienced after World War II. Once, when my father needed surgery, they came to Zagreb for 3 weeks. They couldn't wait to go back to Zadar. They had bonded so much with all of their neighbors. They were constantly phoning them. You know, my parents, they didn't have a shelter to go to, so they would stay home during air raids. They didn't have electricity, so they would go early to bed during the winter and keep each other warm. Then I would give them a phone call, and well, I knew that most everyone else was in the shelters, so I could get a free line. And we would talk and talk and talk. Then I would hear something like, zzz, and I thought, who is sighing like that? And they said, no, it's just a bomb that fell nearby. In a way, I'm one of the lucky ones who actually didn't have any losses in my family. Of course, this is probably why I'm able to talk calmly about it.
Живея на последния етаж, в една мансарда точно под звездите. Прозореца е моята.
In December of '89, I was the leading force of organizing a strike. We went on strike.
In December 1989, I was the leading force organizing a transportation strike. We bus drivers went on strike. We were joined by other city transit workers. The transit in Sofia stopped for about 4 or 5 business days. That was in late December, early January 1989. And then days after that, I went back to journalism. In 1994, I was the station manager of the Radio Free Europe Bureau here in Sofia. When Radio Free Europe closed, I had 2 options. I could do journalism here, but at that time, I would not lower myself to work for any of the media that were operating in this country in the mid-late to late 1990s. It was horrible. Or I could leave the country. I heard yesterday someone on the radio say something very simple, and I thought, yes, that's probably why I left too. Most people didn't leave the country because they couldn't find gainful employment. No, they were running from ignorance and the bad taste of contemporary music, arts, and entertainment. Has anyone mentioned the word chalga to you? It's like Bulgarian turbo folk. Well, Bulgarians have been running away from ignorance and chalga. I went to Canada, where I thought about becoming a journalist. But I was told at the National Institute of Broadcasting in Canada that I would have to take a training course. It would cost about $10,000. That was a lot of money for me, basically all the money that I'd brought with me. I had to think of my daughter and the cost of her education. But I said, okay, if I take this course, then I will be able to get a job as a journalist here in Canada. And they said, no, there was no such guarantee. They would try to help me. And I thought I just couldn't take that risk. However, I really needed to get a job. And of course, the other experience I had in Bulgaria was driving a bus. So my last position at the Toronto Transit Commission, which I held for some 7 years until I retired, was an instructor with the Operations Training Center. If I had stayed, I might have possibly become the chief general manager someday in the 22nd century. But I just got too old and tired and decided to return here to Bulgaria. Back to chalga in ignorance.
When I try to do something for people like me, so I tried to get out the people from prison.
Then I tried to do something for people like me. I tried to get people out of prison. People who were imprisoned for being gay, or simply for just exhibiting homosexual behavior. At that time, it was very hard for the authorities to prove that this was real. Most of the trials were with no proof. And of course, the law was used against people who were uncomfortable for the president at that time, Jan Ileshko. I was working with an organization called the Independent Society for Human Rights. We set up a satellite of the organization, and when I say we, that means 3 people, 2 Hungarian deputies and me. They were the only people who helped us. Nobody else. Even the president of the Human Rights Commission told me all homosexuals should be imprisoned and executed. He was a president of the Human Rights Commission of the Romanian Parliament. Today, he's a judge of the Constitutional Court. I went to Timișoara to visit two guys who had been arrested and put in prison. We tried to find a lawyer to take one case as an example to get an exception to the law. The law was against the new Constitution, so according to the Constitution, this law should automatically disappear. It was a smart idea, actually. I congratulate myself even now. I mean, I didn't know too much. I didn't study the judicial system and very much, but when I realized that no lawyer wanted to take the case, I realized I was right. I found a fantastic young lawyer, and she said immediately, "Yeah, I'll take the course, the case. Let's go to Constitutional Court." 6 months later, the law was suspended. About 2 or 3 months later, everyone was released. One of the two guys in Timișoara, after he was released, he killed himself. And I'm sure it was because of the time he spent in prison. I believe the president is completely guilty for his death, and many others, actually.
Before that, I was just, I think, another guy in a small town, in a small country, who was not asking himself so much important questions. After that.
Before the war, I was just another guy in a small town, small country, who was not asking himself very important questions. After that, I began to question everything. A time of crisis can be horrible. It can bring doom to a person's physical existence. He could become depressed. He could kill himself or be killed or kill someone else. In a crisis, you begin to question things you take for granted. But in a psychological sense, it's good to go through that crisis. You learn something about yourself. You learn to ask yourself questions. It's horrible to go numb in very comfortable circumstances. A lot of people who have enough to eat, who have enough material goods, who feel safe with their social situation, they don't want to change anything. Well, that's also dangerous. Sometimes you need a slap in the face. You need a crisis. You need to get wild. You need to ask yourself questions.
A világot, adjatok egy szalmaszálat, hadd folyam fel ezt a házat, lábam termett a táncba, szemem a kacsintásra, ha táncolok szikrát szórok.
Even using a computer was that time new. I had to learn how to do it, and then that was most of my other memory. Like how can you change things from behind the computer? And I still have that question. You know, after 10 years of doing this.
For me, the strangest experience in joining the European Roma Rights Center was to see an office. Nobody in my family had worked at an office. Everybody worked with real stuff and people. My grandparents were engaged in agriculture. My mother worked with children. My father works with TVs. One can simply see what they do. And then I saw these office people typing at a computer. Even working on a computer was new for me. I had to learn how to use a computer. But I questioned how you can change things from behind a computer. And after 10 years of doing this work, I still do. I've reached a position where I'm one of the top jobs in the field of human rights, even if it is unpaid. I talk to BBC, Al Jazeera. I can write down all my thoughts in a report, and it will get a UN logo and be distributed to 193 member states without any censorship. But sometimes I believe that I would make more change if I established a nice daycare center in northeastern Hungary or somewhere in Africa.
Many times, for example, between teenagers, but the adults people also say to each other, "You are a loser."
I see a lot of American films, and you see many teenagers, but also many adults in these films say to each other, "You are a loser." It means that there's no solidarity between people. To be a loser means that you are responsible only for yourself. You're saying basically, me, I have nothing to do with it because you are the loser. I learned a lot during the 1970s and 1980s about how gypsies were integrated into the labor market and how they followed the non-Roma way of behavior, consumer culture. But in 1990, they were the first to lose their jobs. Not only the Roma lost their jobs, of course, and today these non-Roma are also losers. But the Roma have an additional handicap. You can see that they are darker.
Ha táncolok, szikrát szórok, a világra fittyet hányok. Aj, csiki, csiki, aj, ketemerab, aj, csiki, csiki, aj, ketemerab, aj, csiki, 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 aj, ketemerab.
I went to Alsó-Zsolca. Alsó-Zsolca, it's a small town, northeastern Hungary, and I found a very clear-cut case of segregation.
I went to a small northeastern town in Hungary where I found a very clear-cut case of segregation. There was a kindergarten built in the Roma settlement with few teachers. They closed at noon because parents had no jobs and could take their children home. A few kilometers away, in the same town, there was a well-equipped kindergarten with full opening hours and a staff with medical expertise. No wonder the Roma kids failed in the school test and went straight to special school for the mentally handicapped. So I filed a report at the Equal Treatment Authority. When I went to the first trial, I found out that out of my 3 initial clients, only 1 appeared. And when I found her, she was in tears. When I asked her, "What's going on?" she started screaming at me. "What did you do to my life? What did you do to me? They came from the municipality and threatened to take away my children. I have nothing but my children." She was shaking, literally shaking. I tried to hold her hand. She said, "I need to go now. They're waiting for me." I saw the municipality car outside. An Equal Treatment Authority representative told us she left a letter, which we needed to read aloud now. He opened the envelope and read this beautifully written letter with correct legal terms that could never have been written by my client. She finished only 4 years in school. It was all about how she'd been misled in this case, that she wanted to withdraw her authorization and that she had no intention of complaining about the school system. "Everything is fine in this town," she wrote. I heard later that this letter was typed by somebody at the primary school. What do you do with these stories? It's so easy to talk about human rights violations internationally and nationally. It's so easy to say there's segregation, but at the local level, what can you do? When you want to help clients who are seriously threatened, how can you help them? When a woman is beaten every day, how do you ask her to leave her husband when she has nowhere to go? She has to live there while you are sitting in Budapest in your office.
Jaz do 2002, dokler nisem zvedel za to društvo izbrisanih, sploh nisem vedel v bistvu, da nas.
I joined the Association of Self-Organized Erased in 2002. Before that, I knew only a couple of people in my situation. I wasn't aware that there were thousands of erased. First, the official number was 18,000, and then the government admitted it was 25,000. There were a lot of provocations from the ordinary people. It was, "What do you want, you Bosnian? Just go back home." But when they heard my story and the stories of others who were Serbians since they were babies, Slovenians since they were babies, their attitudes changed. There's quite a lot of support now. When I met someone and they saw me on television, they will tell me, "Good job. This is how it should be done." So it has changed on the everyday level. Still, some politicians haven't changed. In the beginning, our goal was to get back our status and our permanent residency. Some have gotten back this status and some have not. As for me, I could accumulate enough of a work period to retire if they would only recognize all those years of my being erased. But I have this hole in my biography. As for compensation, even if I was to get 5 million euros, that will not bring back my health. The only thing I want is for erasure to be recognized as a crime, and for the people responsible for erasure and for prolonging it to be convicted. I took over the function of the president of our association 2 years ago. The public is they're quite fond of me, I think, because I choose my words carefully. At first, when I took over this job, I was afraid of what would happen. There wasn't so much support in the public. Now I'm swimming in it. It is really important, the part of this movement that's been inclusive. We weren't just struggling for the erased, we were fighting also for the rights of Roma and for the LGBT community. The most important thing, the most important message is that if you don't fight for your rights, if you stay at home and don't fight, nothing will happen. Overall, I would say that it has been a success. We proved that it was the state's fault, not our fault. And the European Court of Human Rights has confirmed that.
After the end of the crisis in the Balkans, I have started to work on the comics which I do for Vreme magazine.
After the end of the crisis in the Balkans, I started to do work for comics for a political weekly published here in Belgrade. I do 2 pages in color every week on a different topic. Usually it doesn't address the political situation in a straightforward way. I find old articles, mostly from the 1920s and 1930s, and then I illustrate them in the form of a comic strip. And I'll give you an example. I found one article about a man who came back from the end of the First World War. He lived in Zaječar, a town in eastern Serbia. He began to behave in a funny way. He went to his regular job, but he began to act a little bit differently. At some point, he burst into a strange kind of anger. He began to talk about how the human race is moving towards catastrophe. He went to his own house and burned it down. He ruined it completely and started to live in a hole in the ground. His wife and children ran away. For me, it was this fantastical scenario. You cannot imagine that a human being could do something more drastic than that. His story is completely forgotten. I spoke to people from that town, and there is no memory of that man.
I have difficulties in defining my position in Hungarian public life.
I have difficulty defining my position in Hungarian public life. It's so divided among very strictly constructed categories. Leftist, rightist, liberal, traditional, national, blah, blah, blah. In my thinking, I have elements from all of these. I understand the problems in conservative thinking, the limits of liberal thinking, of socialist thinking, but I cannot position myself in any of these categories. And without being in any of these positions, you don't really have a public space. Once you say something, they say, ah, yes, you're a nationalist or you're a socialist. No, I'm not. I'm asking questions. I'm defining social problems. Maybe my position is not a very brave position, but I feel uncomfortable in these categories. In this way, my position changed from the time before, but I don't remember identifying with political parties at that time either.
I'm the sun and the air, all the shyness that is criminally vulgar. I'm sun and air, nothing in particular.
Of course there are tremendous change. For my generation also is a tremendous change. I mean, I was 20 at the revolution.
For my generation, it's been a tremendous change. I was a teenager during Ceausescu's years. I was 20 at the time of the revolution. In the 90s, I was digging for documents for the Secretariat somewhere in the woods. Today, I'm a professor at the university. During these years, people changed. Unfortunately, however, it wasn't enough. But as I said, what I've learned during these years is to be patient. Because I'll never see all the changes I wish. I'll be dead by then. But what I can do right now is to do something for the people who are in their 20s and who will develop those ideas further. Because maybe in 50 years, we'll have, let's say, a performative country. And I don't even know what that means.
Auf zum Kampf, zum Kampf sind wir geboren. Auf zum Kampf,
Some comes and here I.
You know, in 1990, what was my perspective on the world? It was naive.
In 1990, my perspective on the world was naive. I couldn't travel around. I had an idea of the East, but nothing beyond that. Now I would say I'm not so naive. And I've noticed that sometimes people who live far away are closer to me than people who live nearby. We have more in common. Now that I can travel around, my perspective is broader. The broader perspective has been painful, but it has also allowed me to meet people who give me hope. You can find them everywhere. Before 1990, it was not so clear to me, but now I realize that the change is about people. I grew up in this society with big ideas of socialism and parties and so on, but the change is not about an idea. It's about people. That kind of change takes time and several generations. We just have to be patient. Maybe there are not so many of us, but you can find us everywhere. You can smell us, I think. It's more about the nose.
Cierpiącej w kolejkach są bólem i troską czynników partyjnych. Haniebne oszczerstwa na środki przekazu to farbą wrogowie systemu po nocach. Lecz niech się nie łudzą, bo władza ludowa strażaków dopierdla.
And this woman was a poor, semi-literate peasant woman from a little village somewhere in Burma who crossed the jungle and the minefield and whatever.
So about 3 years ago, after the Saffron Revolution, but before the democratic transition, I spoke to this Burmese illegal migrant in Chiang Mai in Thailand. There are 1 million Burmese in Thailand who are horribly oppressed as workers and by human traffickers. A lot of NGOs are doing work with the migrants, teaching them that they don't have to accept everything about their lot. Now, this woman was a poor, semi-literate peasant from a village somewhere in Burma who had crossed the minefields, found a job, and taught herself some English. At a training in human rights, I spent a long time talking to her, which was difficult since I didn't speak her language and her English was very poor. But finally, she said, "Listen, lady, come and tell us human right. I go home, I think, human right? I have right." Now, this is what's happening. A lot of disenfranchised people are now taking seriously what we've been saying all along. As for, "Trust us, we'll take good care of you," their answer now is, "Fuck no, we'll take care of ourselves."